when you look at a quarter to a third of the world population moving out of poverty into the middle class, and we look at the demographic-driven global trade and how absolutely important this is in the world today. And you realize also, ladies and gentlemen, that where we are today, now if you look at our population in the United States, we're about 315. By 2030, we'll be 430 million people. By 2050, we'll be 500 million. And what we have is a demographic-driven global trade market. And ladies and gentlemen, we absolutely must have trade, we must have commerce, we must have jobs, or all these other things we're talking about, these wonderful programs, they're not going to happen. We're not at one of these points where it's a break-even point, or we might do this or we might do that. If we do not get control of our global economy, of our U.S. economy, if we do not get control of the deficits and the debt, I mean, we could absolutely default. And if people think this is a scenario that couldn't happen, it can. If you look at really, there's an interesting number that I love. There's 700 million Chinese farmers out of a population of about 1.2 billion. 58% of the Chinese population lives on farms, and mostly small farms. Why is this important? Because, ladies and gentlemen, you've got a situation where in Asia, we're having more and more people move into the cities. And it's interesting also, if you, Rosemary Wilson showed me a shot of the train that she was on in China. And it moves at an incredible speed. Let me tell you why they have the bullet trains in China. They get the heck out of the way of the coal trains. Because the coal trains are coming to the east, and they absolutely must have the coal in order to have the trade, to drive the commerce, and they must export. We're right now about 25% of the global GDP. As the population of the world surges, Virginia must have trade, we must have commerce, we must have jobs. We cannot be a nation that does nothing but create one service or another for one another. We're losing and have lost our manufacturing base. If that manufacturing base does not come back, ladies and gentlemen, we can suck air, and we will suck air. Because very frankly, what we're absolutely faced with is the reality that we have some 22, 23 million people today working in government, for governments. We have almost twice the number of people working in government as we have manufacturing something. You know, when we talk about the Chinese farmers and the huge percentage, we have less than 3% of our population working on farms. We have less than 3% of our population providing food for us. We absolutely must have food, we must provide food, and if we don't, what you have in the Mideast, frankly, and much of the turmoil in the Mideast are 25-year-old and under, well-educated people who are really involved in really seeking jobs. It's really interesting that last year, in 2010, the Iraqi GDP grew some 11%. Iraq, and all the problems they're having, this year they're on track to grow at an even faster rate. So we're seeing global trade. If you have angry, hungry, unemployed young men and women, you're going to have strife. And that strife is absolutely festering to the boiling point, and we're seeing it all over the Mideast. And you know, it's interesting, since the very first day I ran for office, I campaigned against the growth, size, scope of government. That hasn't changed. Andrew, I think, has passed out. Have you passed out, Andrew?
Yes.
The little brochure that I put out at the end of each year, I've had 182 pieces of my legislation pass into law. Not naming bridges, not license plates, significant legislation. If you look at those two pieces, I'll just share on one of them. One of those pieces of legislation simply says, before I got to Richmond, we didn't have party ID on the ballot. Literally, when you went to the polls, you didn't know who the Democrat was, you didn't know who the Republican was. And I put the bill in that said, by golly, when we go to the polls, we are entitled to know who the Republicans are, who the Democrats are. Andrew will also tell you that in the second year I was up there, I introduced 9 bills that killed them all. They made me pay for the ridiculous notion that if I was going to go up there and I was going to start stirring the pot, then they were going to take their pound of grief off my back. Another little bill I had put in, they were very upset with me about was, if you run for office and you raise money to run a campaign, you can't keep it. You can't keep it. I went through the State Board of Elections, went through the final reports of many of the people who were running and who ran the country or ran the state up there. And when I got there were 65 Ds and 35 Rs, and we were treated like scum. And it's interesting, ladies and gentlemen, that when I put the bill in, it simply says, if you raise money for the purpose of running a campaign, that's what it has to go for. And should you not have an opponent, you can give it back to the people from whom you got it. You can deliver it to charity, but you can't keep it. And the practice was at the state level, at the federal level, these people were, every 2 years, had raised $200,000 to $300,000. And it was going on at the federal level as well. And all you had to do was pay the tax on it, declare this income, it was yours. Now you think of that. I mean, it was absolutely ludicrous what was going on. Now you paid the price for that as well. But when you look also at the debt and the debt service of the United States, and the debt and the debt service of the state of Virginia, it's unsustainable. You cannot continue to build the debt we're building and live the life we're living. We're borrowing 42 cents of every dollar we spend. We're borrowing to spend it. It can't go on. You cannot really continue on this path to fiscal insanity and expect the rest of the world to say, okay, we will honor your currency, we will honor your debt. You know, our debt as a nation is financed with paper that matures in 2 3/4 years. Now think of this. We have long-term obligations that is financed with paper that matures in 2 3/4 years. How would you feel about that? The rest of the world debt, even in the countries in Europe and where we're seeing the real serious debt problems, they got paper that matures in 15 years. And the rest of the world debt is maturing 15 to 20 years. Mark on your calendar, 2 3/4 years from today, because the bills are coming due. If you're holding our debt overseas and you're going to continue to hold this debt, are you going to be willing to pay the same interest rate or charge the same interest rate on that debt as you are today? We're paying 1.5421% interest on our debt. Ladies and gentlemen, this affects every locality, every state, every government entity in the nation. And if you don't think so, you're making a mistake. Because, ladies and gentlemen, again, we were, after World War II, we were 51–52% of global GDP. Today, right now, today, as a nation, we're 23–24% of global GDP. And again, right now, almost 24–25% of our total revenues are going for government. That is up 2, 3, 4% just in the last 10–15 years. It cannot continue. You cannot have almost twice the number of government workers as you do have people in this country manufacturing. And you know, when you look at the last 2 elections in Northern Virginia, you really need to understand the numbers. Demographics are going to determine who wins elections in Virginia, who wins elections and who wins elections in this country. Jimmy Chang, our current Secretary of Trade and Commerce, and Peter Sue, these people have credentials that you would not believe. They organized Northern Virginia, and in just 1 2-year election cycle, we saw Obama won Northern Virginia by 14 points. Bob McDonnell, Peter Sue, Jimmy Chang, Bob won by 12. When in your history have you ever seen, in a 2-year cycle, a decidedly liberal area change from D to R in 1 2-year election cycle? Does this affect our politics here? You better believe it does. I go to the OCA meeting each year. Here in Virginia Beach, the year before last, we had it at Hilltop. We had it there at the buffet, and there were about 200 people there. 4 non-Chinese Americans. Myself, Admiral Kerr, and 2 spouses. This year, it was out on Holland Road at a buffet out there. There were 100+ people there. The day before yesterday, when we had the function with George Allen, I was there and delivered a prayer, and I sat at a table with 8 at the table, 7 other Chinese Americans. The table next to us had 8. Everyone at the table, except one fairly uneducated person, was a PhD in one of the sciences. I was the only non-PhD sitting at the table. Now, I wish I had their credentials. I don't. And when you look at the credentials they have, they're invaluable. Diversity is the future of this party. Diversity is the future of this country. We need the engineers. We need the science. And literally, it is the strength and the absolute strength and foundation upon which this country was built. All of you who had their ancestors born in this country 300 years ago, stand up. No? Cynthia, 300 years ago?
Oh, yeah, Cynthia.
300 years ago, you had ancestors born in this country. That's one. But I'll tell you, ladies and gentlemen, you are the minority. You know, when you look at the national debt, when you look at the debt to GDP ratio, when you realize that really where we are right now, trade is absolutely imperative to Virginia. Ladies and gentlemen, the reason this is so important, and this shows what other states are doing to capture and just take away our port business, again, 1 out of every 10 jobs. And ladies and gentlemen, you also realize that where we are today as far as our ports are concerned, our trade is concerned, tax policy in Virginia will have a great deal to do with our success or failure going forward. There are 2 or 3 taxes that we're trying desperately to get rid of. Bob McDonald is as well. The machine tool tax is insane. If you look at the port and the port study, what these other ports are starting with is, frankly, we will give incentives to you all to come in and bring your jobs to Virginia. Ladies and gentlemen, the secret with tax incentives is the multiplier effect. For every dollar of tax incentive, how many dollars of revenue does that generate for our state? 1 to 1, 5 to 1, 10 to 1? Different industries will have different multiplier effects. The preliminary information that I have seen shows that our port business will be somewhere around 8 to 9 to 10 to 1 of revenues that we will generate for our state, not some foreign country, for every dollar in tax credits that we put forth. So do the machine tool tax credits make sense? Absolutely. The local paper here, when I put forward these things, and also getting rid of the corporate income tax. We will not be pleased to realize that in the United States, in Virginia today, we have the highest or second highest corporate income tax in the world. And tax policy will affect ports, tax policy will affect what we do in Virginia Beach. It's interesting, all of you are familiar with Still, and to his credit, Mayor Sessoms, Bill DeStep, and a couple others, went down and talked to Freddie White, who's the chairman of Still here in Virginia. They don't have to stay here. They're a wonderful firm, has superb employees, superb jobs, superb income. Other states are offering them and have offered them all sorts of incentives to come to their states. And our answer is, we're going to impose additional taxes on you. We're going to impose machine tool tax on you. If you're going to modernize your equipment, if you're going to upgrade your equipment in the machine tool business to be able to be competitive and continue to produce goods in this country, first they'll leave Virginia, they'll go to another state, and if that state isn't cooperative, they will leave this country. We have lost manufacturing jobs and lost manufacturing jobs to the point where we're really in a terrible, terrible disadvantage.